Christine Coe, welcome to the Lean Out Podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. So, introduce yourself for the listeners, please, and tell us a little bit about how your work-life balance is different from those who are also in your profession.
I'm a dermatologist and dermatopathologist. So I mostly look at slides of skin and I do see patients still. I see them on Tuesdays mainly. And so I think that's one thing that's different from most dermatologists because you can do dermatopathology from dermatology or from pathology. And so I am a derm trained person who does derm path for short. And I do think that that's one major thing that makes my life easier than other faculty, even because I work at Yale, because the clinical faculty who are all derm based, like seeing patients, there's a schedule, like when to start, when to end, ideally when to end. But slides, it doesn't matter if I'm 30 minutes late or if I go over an hour, 2 hours. No one is talking to me like you're late because it's just a static slide. So that's one thing that makes my work life different from a dermatologist that doesn't do derm path. The other thing is that I've been trying to kind of run against the medical culture that I think I took in basically most of my career. And what I mean by that is I think it's a um, culture that really rewards overwork and workaholism. And so I was diagnosed with breast cancer in late 2022, stage one. And I think I'm cured as much as medical cures are possible for things like cancer these days. And so I'm happy and grateful for that. But it really did make me realize that life is short and do I want to be working all the time? And the answer is no. I do love my job, and that's the thing that I find difficult. I have to say no to things that I really want to do at work in order to do things that are non-work, which I also enjoy. But it's hard sometimes to just see opportunities that I'm like, oh, I would love to do that, but no, I have to say no. And I think having cancer and going through that whole sort of process and journey made me realize that work is not the only thing that I gain a lot of pleasure and satisfaction and fulfillment from. So that's sort of my story in like a little brief thing.
I am so grateful that you are doing well after this diagnosis and that you've had a really great outcome. And I totally understand what you're saying about having some sort of a health crisis cause you to wake up and look at your life and be like, what am I doing? Am I actually spending time doing the things I want? Because the time is precious. And now I really realize that. So, your schedule, I want to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty first, which is that you have one day a week that you do see patients for derm, and then you have other days where you do pathology. So, what do those days look like? They're more flexible in time.
hmm Yeah, they're more flexible in time. And what happens is in my practice, three of us are on for derm path in a given day, but we also cover, there's 10 of us right now actually in derm path. So we cover lectures for medical students, for residents, for fellows. We have two derm path fellows right now. So that teaching is also something that we usually divide up somewhat, equally among us all. But like in a given day, I might have to give a lecture or not. But usually 2 or 3 days, sometimes all 4 days of my non-clinic days, I'm doing derm path. But we cobble together an interesting schedule. So it's like these 3 day sessions over, 3, 4 months. Usually we'll schedule it out. And so it each week actually changes. But I do like to have at least one sort of quote unquote like academic day per week where I don't have clinic and I don't have new derm path slides coming out. That is always best for me. But every once in a while it doesn't happen, especially when the weeks I find hard is if, say, like Labor Day is coming up. Labor Day is a holiday, so everything's, the whole practice is closed. But then usually then Tuesday, then I have clinic, and then Wednesday through Friday I'll usually be on. So it's nice to have the holiday, but it just feels like the whole week is just like go, go, go. And I try to avoid that, but sometimes I can't.
So, as far as the things that you realized that you wanted to spend more time on that are non-clinical or non-medical, tell us a little bit about those.
Yes, so there's a variety of things. So I am a mom and I have two kids. One is 18 and one is 14, almost 15. So my daughter is going to go to college in August. So that'll be a big change. And my son just finished ninth grade. So that's also been sort of a transition, like just teenager and, high school. And both of them, I would say, are a lot more social, especially compared to sort of those COVID years, like 4 or 5 years ago when we weren't supposed to be like interacting socially with other people. And I think it had a big impact on my daughter, especially who was in seventh grade at that sort of really peak initial COVID time. And so I think it's only more recently due to that COVID thing that she's sort of like, it's good, like spreading her social wings. And my son definitely is, with ninth grade being a new school and everything. So that I would say has given me more time also, because at home, they are kind of doing their own thing a lot with their friends or just, with school. Now it's summer, but they have their own activities still. So I do things like I have my own podcast, and I do that because it's fun to talk to people about the things that I'm sort of interested in. And then I've been trying more to create hobbies for myself. So just writing. I've always loved reading. But like, for example, in the last sort of maybe 2 years, I've been playing a lot more tennis, which I'm not good at, but it's really fun to be improving.
That's great. Yeah, I saw that you have written not only a book for kind of more the patient population or like general public, but also a book for kids. So, what prompted you to do that?
Yeah, that story was because my kids influence me a lot, and I find that I learn so much by just seeing what they're learning that I maybe have never learned at all in my life, or just seeing, talking to them about various things. And so my son, when he was in first and second grade, he's deaf and he has cochlear implants. And he had this amazing teacher named Chester Sharp. And Chester, the kids called him by his first name at the time too, up to second grade is the way the school did that. So Chester was really great. He was really interested in having a lot of diversity in the picture books as a curriculum as a whole for his classroom. But one of the ways that that manifested was in the picture books that he had on display around the room. And there was always you could just tell walking into the classroom that there were all sorts of main characters in these books, whether an Asian character or a white character or a black character, and then religions and abilities and just different subject matters as well. And so I asked him at the time, like, do you think you could put out a book that has the main character with cochlear implants, or hearing aids or something? And I had told him I had sort of looked, but most of the books I could find were on the whole process of like diagnosis, so how was the kid diagnosed with a hearing problem, and not just like a kid out there in the world who has a hearing issue and just the stories about something else. And so that's what I wanted. And so he couldn't really find one at that time. It's years ago, and I couldn't either. And so it's sort of the seed was planted in my head, like, oh, maybe like we need to get a book like that out there. And it took like 5+ years, but that was how it started.
That's cool. Your son, was he born without hearing?
So he has something called auditory neuropathy. And so that diagnosis is a mixed bag, probably. And so that's where medically there's an issue with the inner hair cells of the cochlea all the way through the auditory nerve up to the brainstem. So there are different causes, medically speaking, of auditory neuropathy. For my son in particular, it's the inner hair cells of the cochlea that don't work properly. They didn't work at all, probably most of the time. But his hearing did actually seem to fluctuate. Interestingly, some adults who can report, he was a baby, he couldn't report, like, I hear that, I don't hear this. Yeah. So adults with auditory neuropathy, some of them actually don't need hearing aids or cochlear implants. They can hear actually well enough. So it's probably dependent on sort of the organic issue of the hearing loss is. But some individuals probably, they tell me now that my son was in that, really do not hear well enough on a reliable enough basis for the child, the baby, the toddler to trust the signal almost. So they end up ignoring it. Um,
Mm,
and so it it's unclear how much he could truly hear, but his language wasn't developing at all, really. So by the time he was properly diagnosed, because he was misdiagnosed for a long, at least a year and a half, they were like, he's profoundly deaf. They said that he couldn't hear anything and he probably never had. But there were a couple times when he like pointed to like a loaf of bread and was like, bread, kind of not like, like the way babies and toddlers talk. And I was like, oh my gosh, like you just said bread. Like, you know this is called bread. Like I think you've heard me say bread, but it's unclear. Yeah. So
mm. Well, did this experience or your experience with breast cancer, or maybe both, inform why you wrote a book about improving doctor-patient connections and communication?
yeah, definitely mm, the experience I had with my son, I was on the patient side. Obviously, he was the patient, not me. I was the parent taking him around because, he was too young, obviously, to be going to these appointments by himself. But just the way that I was treated, I it kind of shocked me actually. But not to be hypocritical or sound like I'm condemning the doctors that we saw in any way. I realized that I would do the same things as a physician, like on the physician side, and be actually maybe somewhat callous and dismissive of patient concerns and not really intending to do that. So it really taught me a lot of what it feels like to be on the other side when you're very sensitive, very anxious, afraid, when you have all of these sort of quote unquote negative emotions and strong emotions, because I was, at different times so worried about what was going on with him and confused and upset, that why wasn't this diagnosed properly? Not that it was really anyone's fault, initially that he wasn't diagnosed. He didn't have the right study. So he needed an auditory brainstem response study, which is not part of typical newborn hearing screening. And he had passed the typical newborn screening. He had it and he passed because that tests the outer hair cells of the cochlea and his are normal um, and or were normal. Now they're not since he has the cochlear implants. But so it was a mistake in the type of test, but it's like that's no one's fault because that's the newborn screening that we have in Connecticut because it does pick up the vast majority of sensory neural hearing loss that is present at birth. It's just auditory neuropathy is rare. And so that's the other thing that I've sort of realized through this that, we are trained as physicians to pick up on what's common. And even though to a certain degree we're trained to pick up on the rare, a lot of the screening guidelines even and the way that we screen are it's based on a bell curve. It's based on the majority. It's like how do we do this in the most efficient way possible to pick up the most people with a given disease. And so, this unfortunately is an example of where he has something rare and so he didn't get the right test. And I think that's hard because we don't have enough time as physicians to say, oh, yeah, his hearing is normal. But by the way, if you think there's something wrong, like keep pursuing it, just keep thinking about it because we don't pick up 100% of, hearing loss issues with the test that the newborn screening that he had. Um, but so I just sort of, even as a physician, I just trusted that, okay, he's fine. And so I think what really the biggest thing that I kind of took away from the whole thing with my son is, there's a patient education piece that I think um, maybe I even discounted more because I'm a physician, just sort of trusted that, oh, his newborn screening is fine. So why could there be anything wrong? Because at different points up to when he was first tested again at 9 months, I was like, there's something wrong with his hearing. So that kind of not, I wouldn't say instinct, but just like watching him and just spending time with him on a daily basis, I was like, there's something wrong here. But I just thought like, well, how could there be? He was tested, like it should be fine. And I think that's what I really feel like I should have known that as a physician, that it's not like any one test is usually 100% perfect. But I didn't. And so I didn't think about that. And so that is one thing that I think I try to be more um, cognizant of with my own patients now. And I just tell them, much more freely than I ever did before. Like, okay, well, I'm not sure why you have this symptom, if they have a certain symptom, or I'll say, well, I think it's this, and this is the reason. But if it continues or you get other symptoms like this, or this, if I can sort of remotely think of something, I'll just tell them because they wouldn't know. Because I feel like I might not have really processed it in the same way as I would now. But if at birth they had said, oh, like we do this routine newborn screening and he passed, but it's really only 95% accurate. So just, keep thinking about the milestones and stuff. Um, and we have all those well visits with pediatrics that are supposed to help, pick up on things that are missed with the various tests that we do for various things. But I think there was this sort of belief in the medical system that I had, which isn't necessarily bad. And then also a belief that there couldn't be anything wrong with him. And I think really there are a lot of emotions tied to that because who really wants to think that there's any, medical problem, right, with their child? So I think there were just sort of three major things that were sort of competing against me trusting myself and pursuing that there was something wrong with him. And I guess I'll just insert here because I keep saying things like wrong or, medical issue or problem. And I am also aware of the whole ableist kind of tendency to say that hearing loss or profound deafness is a problem. And I don't mean to be giving that sort of ableist message just to say that, because there's the capital D deaf community who believes there's nothing wrong with profound deafness and that it's just a difference that we should honor. On the extreme side, a parent like me who chooses for their son to have cochlear implant surgery is, on an extreme end, just wrong. Like I'm really not honoring the difference that he has. And so I just insert that because I'm aware of that and I want to, you know, I do want to honor that perspective. It doesn't seem like I honored it with what we chose for our son. Um, but what I would say is that one of the big reasons that I chose that is because I realized in doing the research that I could into this controversy of, whether profound deafness needs to be medically treated or not, was that you can't give cochlear implants to someone later, like when they're 18, because their brain will have developed. It's too late to give them then, spoken language at that time. So it had to be done when he's not of age of consent. And I realized though that he can choose later. Like, he can't necessarily maybe take out the inside component, but maybe he could, but he can always just take the outside off and choose then to be profoundly deaf. And so I realized that with all the, pros and cons and everything that I thought about, is that this gives him a choice later, whereas otherwise he wouldn't have the choice, not with the technology that we have now, or then. So, but it was a really difficult thing, and you can tell maybe I still struggle with this because I never wanted, especially between him and me, but really for him, I really wanted to be able to honor what he would want for himself later. And I think this is the paradox and the real difficulty of parenting, because I think all parents can relate to that, right? We make decisions for our kids all the time, the younger, especially the younger they are and when they're babies. And who knows how the kid's going to feel about that later.
Now I understand why I saw on your website that you were on some podcasts that were like about parenting. You've been through this big journey with some big decisions that really do affect, like you said, the life of your child in the future. And I appreciate that you're pointing out the difference between the capital D deaf community and like your choices. And I honestly think about this stuff that because I've done in vitro. I had a surrogate at one point. And I mean, people have major reservations about stuff like that. And also, like, why don't you just adopt a kid? There's kids out there all over the place that need a home. And, why are you doing this? Well, there's enough room in this whole world for people to make multiple different paths and choices. And you making your choice doesn't mean anything about, disparaging someone else's choice.
Yes.
And I like to apply this same thinking to work-life balance and to medicine and navigating our career paths because we don't all have to do this same prescribed path that is supposed to be this golden path to success. Everyone can do something different. Like there's room, to be a professional and to do a podcast, to write a book, to work part-time, to do something unique in medicine, to start a business. And that's what I really like about it. And I think you're demonstrating this very well and that you sounds to me like you've been a great parent to your kids.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, parenting, I think the major thing it's taught me is we all fail
At
over and
various
over
things. Yeah.
again, right? And you just have to, I've learned to apologize through being a parent. Just say to my kids, like, okay, I'm sorry. That was that was me
This is new
going off the
territory
deep
for
end.
me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And and they've given me grace, which is awesome. And I've had to give them grace plenty of times because kids are kids. But yes, I completely agree with you. I think that one thing that I took on from when I was a young kid, for whatever reason, I don't know that anyone ever told me to do this, but I took on like the fixed mindset, basically, that things need to be a certain way, my career needs to be a certain way, and part of that's tied into like who makes that rules, right? Like who makes that
Yeah.
sets what a career is supposed to be, and so it's like people pleasing, it's like, well, there's this way, so that's what I also mean by the culture of medicine, this culture that if you're in a program when you're in training where it's like academics is the way to go, and you believe that, and I'm in academics, but I don't actually believe that. Um, I trained in a program where it was like perfectly normal and actually more respected to go into private practice. And so it's sort of a little weird, like, why did you go into academics? So that even was like actually a little bit of a departure. I limited myself as a physician, and I think I could have very well limited myself as a parent making this decision for my son. about what to do about his hearing. Because if I had, too much taken on, oh, I want to people please and I want to not be ableist and really listen to what the capital D deaf community is saying, I wouldn't have had him have, the cochlear implant surgery. But the final piece of that is like making the decision for me and the family that I have. And what I realized is I was like, the only problem I have with American Sign Language or another signed language is I don't speak that language. And I was so stressed. And so I was like, imagine if someone's like, you can only bring up your child in French and you don't speak French, but by the way, you need to learn French right now and, teach your child French. I'd be
Like
like,
today.
yeah, I'm like, how? Why? Like, I'm stressed. Like, how am I going to do that? So it came down to I can't learn American Sign Language quickly enough, I didn't think. But I thought, okay, if I quit and I dedicate myself, maybe I can learn it. But I was like, but then what about my husband, like his dad? What about his sister? What about the grandparents? Like, so I realized that it's the choice that I made is it's really because of the language that we speak, which is a spoken language. Whereas I totally understand deaf parents, capital D deaf parents who use their language is signed language, where they're like, yeah, there's no problem here. Like, I'm just going to communicate with the child in sign language. And so I get that. Um, and then even the controversy goes all the way to back when it was at its peak. They would say, well, a parent like me, then the solution is, if you go with the capital D deaf culture, I need to give my child up and have the child brought up in a sign language family or community. And honestly, I was like, I cannot do that. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to give up my child. I was like, I just, it came up to that, like up against that, where I was like, I mean, I love him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's extreme, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so he's 15, right? Almost. So like this is like 14 years ago. So you were probably kind of early on in your career when all this is going on and this is super stressful. And these things, it's like people have infertility, health crises, children issues right around that same time that they're trying to establish their career. And I look at it as, and I've called it this before in talks, the perfect storm. It's like you are trying to show that you're a team player. You are trying to be ambitious, if you want to use that term, or make a name for yourself in your career. And you've just gotten done and you're in that autonomous phase. But then, like, it's difficult because human things happen to us, right? And I'm sure that this informed your writing and why you've chosen to do what you've done. I also wonder if you started your podcast, The Girl Doc Survival Guide, related to your experiences as a patient and a doctor. What prompted that?
Yes. I am trying to push back against my own habits of thinking, sort of habits of mind. Because as I said, I grew up with a fixed mindset. I grew up not um, being able to name my emotions pretty much at all. Although I do also really believe more of Lisa Feldman Barrett's work in emotions now, where it's sort of really tied more to energy. Like, is it high energy, low energy, that I'm feeling? And that actually sort of resonates with me now and something that I'm sort of pondering still. But yes, I need to spend time on reminding myself on a regular basis to
Yeah.
not fall into these ingrained habits that I've had from when I was very young. I think these sort of fixed mindset patterns of people pleasing and assuming that there's one way, one best way, whether it's at work. At work, I think I'm better at now. I think at home, I'm still struggling because I think I want to be a great mom. I know I can't be a perfect mom, but I want to be a great one. And it's hard to know how to do that. It'd be great also to be a great wife at the same time. And I think that's really hard too to figure out how to do that. The podcasts that I do and some of the writing that I do is just trying to reflect on that, as you so aptly call it, it is a perfect storm. And I think that for me, when I'm stressed, when things feel like there's a storm going on and it's just survival, I default to my habits of mind. So the fixed mindset way of thinking. And it's not like a healthy way to think, but it's survival, And so I always think that if I had better coping skills that just habitually pop up when I'm stressed, I would be better off. And I'm learning to develop them through these other things that I do.
I totally get that because I love to learn from my podcast guests. There's always something that I'm reminded that I can apply to my own life every single time that I interview someone or connect with someone on here. It's so good. And I'm wondering if you have any particular advice for people who are feeling like they can't get out of that fixed mindset because I know exactly what you mean. I've been there too. And I would say that it's kind of part of being on the whole treadmill of achievement idea, but fixed mindset goes even beyond that to like, I can't change myself or, I'm a certain type of person and this is who I am and that kind of stuff. Whereas we can change and grow and learn new things all the time. So, what's your go-to strategy besides your podcast and like learning from other people and reflecting?
Yeah, I think the go-to strategy is really to be nicer to myself.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that encompasses so much. What I mean by that is believe in what your mind or body is telling you about a certain situation. Like for my son, like I just wish I had believed myself sooner, because there were at least four different opportunities where I could have maybe been like, but wait, something's wrong here, that was a little earlier um, than when he was finally diagnosed. So it applies to that. Just in terms of like the other things that I do right now, it still falls under that being nicer to myself because I do love my job. So I could just work. I think like if no one really regulated me, I could work like 12 hours a day on like different work projects too, like not just like clinical work. And I would find it enjoyable, but that's not being nice to myself because I learned through breast cancer that I might not be able to work being a physician, all the time. And so I am the type of person like we talked about like different pathways. I can't be at home without something to do, And I'm sure I could read books and like things like that, but I want to have something that I'm sort of actively thinking about and growing from. And so I think that's what I like about my job. But I realize there needs to be a hobby where I also can grow and change. And so that's the podcast. That's learning tennis, like doing something that I'm bad at and becoming better at it. And so for someone else, it might not be good to like have, be adding on activities, especially if you're overwhelmed as a new mom or something. I couldn't do anything new as a mom, right? I had my relatively new job. I have these kids, it's like enough, and kids at that young age are changing so much. But yeah, I would say just to be nicer and trust that you do know what you need. Just have to sort of give yourself the stillness and space to listen to yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you so much. Christine, where can people find you if they want to connect with you or learn more about your work?
So I have a website. It's just my name, Christine J. Co. J is for my middle name, Jean, ChristineJCo.com. And my podcast link is there too. But it's also, as you mentioned, the Girl Doc Survival Guide. And you can Google that and it'll pop up and it's on streaming platforms. And I'm on some social media. I'm not great at social media, but I am Christine J. Co. MD on X. And I'm Christine Jean, Jean Co. on Instagram. And I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's also Christine J. Co. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Don. You're amazing.
Thanks.